Hey guys, what's up? So I don't know if you guys have been following me since 2015, but back in 2015, I did my top 5 favorite horror films of the 2010s decade. At that moment, it was a video that you guys seemed to really enjoy. I had a lot of fun making that video, but obviously if you couldn't tell, we're not in that decade anymore. We're in a brand new decade, and a lot of people have gone back to revisiting their favorite films the past decade. And as you all know, since I am the biggest horror buff of the crew, I just love the horror genre in general. But if you guys couldn't tell by the title of the video, I'm not just delivering a top 5, but I am delivering a top 10. And I just realized something. This is not quite the right background nor the right attire for a horror themed video, so give me one moment. That's more like it. So yes guys, I am here to share with you all today my top 10 favorite horror films of the past decade. Now before I go on, I feel like I need to issue a couple of guidelines. First of all, this is my subjective list. I completely understand that the horror films that not only I love the most, but the films that scared me the most are not going to be the same for you guys, which is completely okay. Second of which is that I have not seen every single horror film from the past decade, and if I wanted to wait till I saw all those horror films to do this video, well, we'd be waiting eons for that. Third and final, let's just have a great time talking about the horror films that not only we love the most, but of course the ones that scared us the most as well. Now before I get into my top 10, I do have quite a few honorable mentions, and just to let you guys know, these are in no particular order, but my honorable mentions are It Comes at Night, Demon House, Annihilation, Raw, It Chapter 1, It Follows, VHS 2, Hush, Doctor Sleep, and The Wailing. Alrighty guys, with that being said, let's get into my top 10 favorite horror films of the previous decade. Let's get it on! Kicking off this list at my number 10 is Mandy, a Nicolas Cage horror film. Yes guys, a Nicolas Cage movie made my top 10. I never thought I'd see this day. Mandy was a movie that I'd heard so much about it before I saw it, and when I was watching it, I did not expect to love this movie as much as I did. One of the things that I absolutely love about Mandy, besides Nicolas Cage, to which I will get to in a little bit, but one particular thing that I loved about Mandy is that in the film's first half, this film starts off as kind of a slow burn, but at the same time it's a very eerie, a very atmospheric movie that has a little bit of an H.P. Lovecraft vibe, especially with the visuals, but then right in the second half, it turns into this badass, insane, grindhouse action horror film that by the end had my jaw dropped. And of course, as you could probably imagine, it has an amazing performance from Nicolas Cage, who actually starts off a little subdued, but then right by the end, oh, he goes into his good old Nicolas Cage that we all know and love. And to add on top of that, Mandy has trippy visuals and it has a kick-ass score. The best way I can describe Mandy is that this movie is like watching a nightmare on LSD. Now, while I haven't done LSD, I could probably imagine that this is what a nightmare on LSD would probably look like. Coming in at my number 9 spot is A Quiet Place. Now, I'm not gonna lie to you guys, I originally had A Quiet Place in my honorable mentions, but after rewatching it recently, that may have put it in my top 10. First of all, I gotta say that I still cannot believe that to this day, that this is John Krasinski's first horror film as a director, because he seems like a seasoned pro at this. A Quiet Place is a horror film that had me re-examine sound, not just because of how scary sound can be, but at the same time of how much we rely on sound in our day-to-day lives. From the moment that this movie starts to the final frame, A Quiet Place not only packs tension minute by minute, but second by second. And actually take it back to this movie ends the tension by the final frame, because we still have A Quiet Place Part 2 coming out. I don't know when because of the damn coronavirus, but man, I am so hyped to see that movie. Because you know that while you're watching this, that at any given moment, that if any of these guys make the slightest loud noise, yeah, they are. But yeah, man, I loved A Quiet Place, and I cannot wait for A Quiet Place Part 2. Alright, so at my number 8 spot is a movie that I feel like that once I reveal the title, half of you will probably love the choice, but then the other half will either absolutely hate the choice or they'll stop watching in general, which I completely understand because this movie was one of the most polarizing films of the last decade, and that is the remake of Suspiria. Yeah, like I mentioned before to you guys, if you stop watching, trust me, I won't blame you because I know that there are people that absolutely love this movie, But then there are people that absolutely hate this movie, and I completely understand both sides of the coin on this one. Now, to put it lightly, and I mean lightly when I say this, the remake of Suspiria was not only one of the most unsettling horror films that I saw in the past decade, but also one of the most disturbing horror films of the past decade. Because Luca Guadagnino directs Suspiria with such an aggressive finesse that there are not only horrifying images that are still in my head, but there are a couple of sequences in particular that the moment I think about them. Now, if you guys were to ask me if I prefer the original or the remake, honestly, it's hard to say because both films are completely different beasts. Now, while I will say that the original does a lot of things better than the remake, I think there are a lot of things that the remake does a lot better than the original. So like I said before, completely different beasts. So yes, like I mentioned beforehand, this movie was very polarizing. Some people absolutely hate the remake of Suspiria, and some absolutely love the remake of Suspiria, and I'm on the latter half because not only did I think that this was a terrific remake, but God, it was unsettling to say the least. Coming in at my number 7 spot was personally for me the most fun that I had while watching a horror film this past decade, and that is the Evil Dead remake. Now, when it comes to the original Evil Dead films, I love the first Evil Dead film. The second Evil Dead is not only to me one of the greatest sequels of all time, but it's one of the best movies of all time, and admittedly, I have not seen Army of Darkness. And like I mentioned beforehand with the remake of Suspiria, if you guys were to ask me if I prefer the original Evil Dead or the remake of Evil Dead, once again, it's hard to say because both films are completely different beasts. However, one thing that I really admire and that I love about the remake of Evil Dead is that this movie is a remake, a badass remake at that stands on its own ground. And yeah, I'm not gonna lie to you guys that when it comes to the character development of the remake of Evil Dead, it's not the greatest, but let's be real here. You're not here for character development, you're here for a badass, gory time of the movies, and the remake of Evil Dead delivered specifically on that tenfold. And speaking of the gore, if you ask me personally, the Evil Dead remake has some of the best practical effects and the best gore effects that I saw from a horror from the past decade. Now, don't get me wrong, guys. I will always love the original Evil Dead, and that film is a timeless classic within the horror genre. However, if you guys were to ask me right now what is a badass remake within the horror genre, I'd easily say Evil Dead. At my number 6 spot comes from a filmmaker that I believe is the best working within the horror genre today, and that is Mike Flanagan's Gerald's Game. Mike Flanagan is a filmmaker that consistently makes great content that no one talks about, and it puzzles me to this day why he is not more well known in the horror genre, because every film that he has made is either really good or it is great. Now, like I mentioned in my review of Gerald's Game, I had not read the book prior to seeing the movie, and actually to this day, I have not read the book, but I am confident in saying that Gerald's Game is one of the best Stephen King adaptations out there. And if you ask me, Gerald's Game is a movie that solely rests on Carla Gugino, who, by the way, delivers an absolute knockout performance, which I still cannot believe was not nominated for an Oscar. The moment that Carla Gugino is chained up on this bed, you are in for one of the most tension-filled rides of the horror genre from the past decade, not to mention for some of the best scares in the horror genre as well. And not only do these scares come from the moments that transpire while Carla Gugino is locked on this bed, but at the same time, these scares come from the psychological turmoil that's going on in her head. Gerald's Game is not only a terrific Netflix movie, but like I mentioned beforehand, Gerald's Game is one of the best Stephen King adaptations out there. Coming in at my number 5 spot was the most creative horror film that I saw in the last decade, and that is The Cabin in the Woods. The Cabin in the Woods is not only a celebration of the horror genre, but at the same time, this is a movie that picks apart the horror genre to the bone marrow. Like, the best way I can describe The Cabin in the Woods is that this is basically Scream, but for a new generation. I'm telling you all right now, if you guys have not seen Cabin in the Woods, go into this film not knowing anything, because if you guys do so, you're in for such a creative movie, for such a scary movie, and also for a movie that's absolutely hilarious. This was a movie that made us re-examine the horror genre in its entirety, from how we look at character stereotypes, to how scares work, to how characters make certain decisions. This was a movie that made us change the way that we look at the horror genre. And to add on top of that, The Cabin in the Woods has one of the coolest, one of the biggest, and one of the most jaw-dropping third act reveals that I have ever seen a horror film. And for those of you who have seen the film, you will know what I'm talking about, because that scene is badass. But yeah, if you guys have not seen The Cabin in the Woods, what are you waiting for? So at my number 4 spot is actually a movie that, if you guys have been following me since 2013, you will all know that this was my number 1 movie of that year. And coming in at my number 4 spot is The Conjuring. The Conjuring, man. Now, if you guys ask me personally, I find that the original Conjuring is one of the best supernatural horror films ever made. The Conjuring is an excellent horror film that not only excels in delivering excellent tension, but it also excels in delivering some of the most terrifying scares of the previous decade. Sorry, that clap scare still fucking scares me to this day. Yeah, I remember that at the midnight showing of The Conjuring, to which the midnight showing that I attended was one of the greatest theater experiences of my life. But yeah, another reason why I feel like The Conjuring excels is because this movie just feels like an old school horror film that goes back to the days of, let's say, The Exorcist or Rosemary's Baby, those classics. And I'm not gonna lie to you guys that when it comes to the Conjuring franchise in its entirety, the films that have come after The Conjuring have not come close to what the original Conjuring has done. But if you have guys not seen the original Conjuring, stop what you're doing and watch it. It is, I'm telling you guys right now, it is one terrifying ride. Coming in at my number 3 spot is a movie that I am going to introduce to you guys by saying one quote. Wouldst thou like to live deliciously? Guys, I am telling you all right now, you have no idea how much I love The Witch. One particular reason why I absolutely love The Witch is because this is a movie that is just soaked from head to toe in this atmosphere that just feels dreadful the entire time. From the moment that The Witch starts, we are transported in this amazing recreation in which, I don't remember if it's the 17th century or 18th century England. My apologies, I get that all mixed up all the time. Nonetheless, the recreation is absolutely stunning with some gorgeous cinematography, and if you ask me, one of the most unsettling horror scores I have heard in a long time. There's one particular track I cannot remember off the top of my head, but just thinking about it is really making me tense up right now. It was that terrifying. And one particular reason why I feel like that a lot of people hate The Witch is because when it came to the horror aspect, I feel like that a lot of people were expecting more in-your-face scares or more jump scares, to where, to me, The Witch isn't really a horror film. I mean, sure, there are horror elements in The Witch, but it's more of a drama with some really scary elements. In particular, the horror to me in this film, the true horror, is seeing this family dissolve while the witch is the catalyst of the events that unfold to this family. And you guys are gonna call me crazy when I say this. I have seen The Witch over 13 times, yes. I have seen The Witch 13 times, and I actually plan on seeing it more. And if you guys were to ask me, I find that The Witch has one of the most terrifying horror film endings that I have seen in a very long time. Alrighty guys, we are coming down to my number 2 and my number 1 favorite horror films of the previous decade. Now, I'm not gonna lie to you guys, my number 2 was my number 1 for a very long time, of course, as you guys could probably imagine, until I saw my number 1. But my number 2 favorite horror film of the previous decade is The Babadook. Now, before I saw The Babadook, this was a movie I didn't see any footage of, I didn't see a trailer, I didn't even know its existence until I saw a review by Chris Stuckman, and I thought, okay, I should probably give this movie a go, and damn. This movie, guys, this movie was fucking terrifying to say the least. I mean, oh my god. The Babadook and my number 1 favorite horror films of this previous decade were the only horror films that legitimately made me scream. Yes, I actually screamed during The Babadook, to which that never happens when I watch a horror film. Now, if you guys have seen the trailer to The Babadook, you will all know that the trailer to that movie really more sells it as a supernatural monster movie, to where the actual movie is not even close to a monster movie, even though The Babadook itself, that thing is, like I said before, it's fucking terrifying. But where the true horror of The Babadook lies, it's where it looks at the effects of grief and depression, and it really shows of how scary grief and especially depression really is. And the thing about The Babadook for me is that this is one of those few rare horror films that actually got scarier upon more viewings. And actually, upon the 3rd viewing, I stayed at my best friend's place and I went into the guest room. I was so frightened of sleeping because of one specific reason. The closet door was open and I was fucking terrified that that thing was lurking in the closet just watching me, because damn, that movie is terrifying. So yeah, if you guys couldn't tell, The Babadook scared me shitless. And not only is this film a terrific horror film, but it is also one of the best directorial debuts I have seen out there. Seriously, if you guys have not seen The Babadook, check this movie out. Alrighty guys, we are finally here. My number one favorite horror film from this past decade. Now, a lot of you could have probably guessed it since I didn't talk about it earlier, but in case if you guys still don't know what it is, I'm just gonna do one thing. Hereditary is my number one favorite horror film from this past decade. Holy fucking shit, Hereditary. Now, when it comes to the films I've mentioned previously on this list, I have talked about the horror films on this list that have scared me shitless. Hereditary was the one horror film from this past decade that did more than just scare me shitless. Guys, Hereditary straight up traumatized me. I remember when I first saw this movie, I actually took one of my best friends with me to the press screening, and after that horrific reveal in the first 20 minutes, we were both going like to each other, where is this movie gonna go? Holy shit. And the more that Hereditary just escalated from that horrific event, the more scared, the more horrified, and the more traumatized that I got until the movie's absolutely just nightmare-fueled ending. And like The Babadook, Hereditary is one of the few rare horror films that, like I mentioned before with The Babadook, this is a movie that actually gets scarier for me the more I watch. And in particular, there was always one scene, especially near the end, that legitimately scares the fuck out of me every time I watch. And I still cannot believe that to this day that Toni Collette was snubbed for Hereditary. Seriously, she should have not only gotten nominated for Hereditary, but she should have fucking won for Hereditary. And I'm gonna say something right now, and this might get a lot of hate because I know that Hereditary has been polarized along audiences. This, to me, is one of the scariest horror films I have ever seen. Like The Witch, in a way, this is a movie that starts off more as a drama, but how it escalates, it goes into a state of a horrific nightmare that just imprints on your brain and it doesn't leave you until God knows how long. And one thing I must touch upon is the film's terrifying soundtrack, especially the track called Reborn. That is by far one of the most bone-chilling tracks I have ever heard in a horror film. I mean, it's... God, damn, that track was awesome. Also, Hereditary has some of the most horrific scares I have ever seen in a horror film. Whether you're looking at the headless child scene or seeing Toni Collette doing this, oh my god, the sound effects alone from that just... God! And not just those two scenes, but Hereditary just has the most bone-chilling things I've seen a horror film in quite some time. So yes guys, to put it simply, Hereditary is the horror film from the previous decade, not only the one that I love the very most, but of course, to me, it was the most horrifying horror film from this past decade. Alrighty guys, and that is going to do it for my top 10 favorite horror films from this past decade. Please comment down, let me know below, what are your top 10 favorite horror films from this past decade, and also let me know a couple of your honorable mentions, let me know below. And also, if you guys remember correctly, I did do my top 5 worst horror films of that decade at the moment. If you guys want me to do my top 10 worst horror films of the previous decade, let me know below. If you guys want to follow me on social media, I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Twitch. I'm also on Snapchat and Stardust. So if you guys want to follow me on all those social media platforms, all the links and the usernames are in the description below. I hope you guys enjoyed my top 10 favorite horror films of the 2010s decade. If so, please hit that like button, also subscribe, and don't forget to hit that notification bell for whenever a new video of mine goes live. If you guys like to see any of my previous 2 videos, please click either right there or there. And of course, until my next video or my next review, I will see you guys next time.